For decades, naval officers believed that convoys could not be sunk en masse by a single submarine. Ships moved together, escorted by destroyers and patrolled by aircraft, and the conventional wisdom dictated that submarines were dangerous only to isolated, unprotected vessels. Submarines could harass, disrupt, delay, but a disciplined, escorted convoy was supposed to be invincible. The Imperial Japanese Navy had relied on this rule with full confidence. By early 1943, Japan's supply lines stretched across the Pacific, moving essential resources, fuel, ammunition, food, and troops from Southeast Asia back to the home islands. Convoys hugged coastlines, traveled under air cover, and maintained strict formation. Japanese commanders believed these measures rendered their shipping relatively safe. Submarines, especially American ones, were seen as minor nuisances. The Japanese doctrine treated them as stalkers of stragglers, not as decisive weapons capable of annihilating multiple transports at once. Sonar systems were in their infancy, crews were undertrained, and depth charges were often set improperly. Convoy attacks were rare and usually small-scale. But in January 1943, Commander Dudley "Mush" Morton shattered that assumption. One man, commanding a single submarine, would turn this established rule on its head and leave the Japanese Navy reeling in disbelief. Dudley Morton was 37 years old and already an experienced officer in the U.S. Navy. Stocky, sharp-eyed, and known for his audacious leadership style, Morton had earned the nickname Mush among his crew. His reputation was built on daring maneuvers and an insistence that submarines were offensive weapons, not merely stealthy scouts. He believed in engaging the enemy at close range and striking decisively rather than waiting for perfect conditions. Morton commanded USS Wahoo, a Gato-class submarine, 311 feet long, with 6 forward torpedo tubes, 4 aft, and a modest deck gun. His crew consisted of 80 men who had endured long patrols across the Pacific, surviving cramped quarters, dangerous depths, and the constant threat of enemy destroyers. Before Morton assumed command, Wahoo had achieved little: missed shots, cautious engagements, and reports with few results. Upon taking command, Morton transformed Wahoo into a lethal weapon. He brought in Lieutenant Commander Richard "Dick" O'Kane as his fire control officer, and together they rewrote the rules of submarine warfare. Close-range attacks, surface engagements, and aggressive pursuit became their standard. The philosophy was simple: attack effectively first, then worry about survival. The strategic context was critical. The Pacific War in early 1943 had reached a bloody stalemate in the Solomons. Guadalcanal was still contested, and Japanese garrisons on New Guinea depended on regular convoys to maintain supply lines. A single convoy lost meant thousands of men stranded without food or ammunition. Japanese anti-submarine tactics were still outdated, relying on slow, inexperienced sonar operators and poorly trained destroyer crews. Morton received orders to patrol off Wewak, New Guinea, in waters that were shallow and dangerous for submarines. The Japanese assumed such areas were safe for convoys, relying on coastal hugging and minimal escorting. Morton saw opportunity where the enemy saw safety. He prepared his crew meticulously, reviewed sonar readings, and studied convoy patterns. The mission was dangerous, perhaps suicidal, but he believed that striking boldly would yield results impossible through conventional tactics. On January 26, 1943, Morton began his patrol. Wahoo crept beneath the surface, batteries humming, hull tense with anticipation. Morton and O'Kane studied the periscope scope for hours, scanning for movement. By mid-morning, Morton spotted the convoy. 4 transports, escorted by 2 destroyers, steamed in formation. Smoke trailed from their funnels. Soldiers could be seen on deck, unaware of the predator beneath the waves. The convoy moved deliberately, confident in their protection. Morton ordered Wahoo to close the range. At 3,000 yards, he calculated firing angles and depth settings. 2,500 yards, he checked periscope bearings against radar readings. 20,000 yards, he issued the first attack orders. Wahoo's forward torpedo tubes were loaded, and the crew braced for the first strike. Morton made a bold decision. He surfaced. The small deck gun became a tool of intimidation. The gun crew fired a 5-inch shell directly at the bridge of the nearest transport. Smoke and fire erupted immediately. Soldiers shouted in panic. Japanese lookouts scrambled. The first torpedo launched, 1,800 yards, then the second, then the third. Wahoo shuddered as the torpedoes ripped through the water. The first transport exploded amidships, a column of fire and water marking its destruction. The second torpedo struck another ship, causing it to list sharply. Japanese escorts reacted, firing wildly and attempting to ram the submarine. Depth charges plummeted nearby, creating concussive waves that rattled every bulkhead. But Morton ordered evasive maneuvers with precision. Wahoo swung to avoid the oncoming destroyer, while simultaneously launching torpedoes from the aft tubes. Range closed, 1,500 yards, 1,200 yards, 900 yards. The escort attempted another ram. The torpedo struck first, detonating a magazine and obliterating the ship in a massive explosion. Smoke and fire engulfed the convoy. Ammunition cooked off on the remaining transports. Chaos erupted on every vessel. Morton ordered Wahoo to dive just as Japanese aircraft arrived. Depth charges fell haphazardly, set too shallow. The hull of the submarine vibrated with each explosion. Lights flickered, tools and equipment crashed onto the deck, but the crew held firm. Wahoo emerged hours later to a field of wreckage and burning ships. 4 transports totaling more than 20,000 tons had been destroyed in a single engagement. Hundreds of Japanese soldiers were killed or stranded on debris. The Japanese command could not comprehend the scale of the loss. Their doctrine insisted convoys were safe. Their escorts were supposed to prevent such destruction. Morton had not only sunk a convoy, he had shattered an entire strategic assumption in a single bold action. The immediate impact of Morton's attack was profound. The Japanese Navy realized that their supply lines were vulnerable in ways they had never anticipated. Convoy commanders altered routes, zigzagged erratically, and increased escort numbers. Yet these measures were insufficient against the new American tactics pioneered by Morton. The loss forced Japanese planners to confront their inadequate anti-submarine warfare methods. Sonar operators were inexperienced, destroyers lacked coordination, and depth charges were inconsistently deployed. Morale fell among convoy crews, and the Imperial Navy began to hesitate, delaying shipments and rerouting supplies through longer, riskier paths. Morton's attack spread rapidly through the U.S. submarine force. Close-range attacks, daylight surface engagements, and aggressive pursuit became standard. By 1944, submarines, representing just 2% of the U.S. Navy's total strength, accounted for over 55% of Japanese shipping losses. Entire fleets of transports, oil tankers, and troop ships disappeared, gradually starving garrisons and crippling Japan's ability to resupply its distant holdings. The attack on the Wahoo convoy was the catalyst. Morton had demonstrated that a single submarine, led by a daring and decisive commander, could unturn assumptions and reshape the battlefield. Morton's success, however, came at a heavy cost. In October 1943, USS Wahoo disappeared in the La Perouse Strait. All 80 men aboard, including Morton, were lost. He was 38 years old. Richard O'Kane survived the war, carrying Morton's philosophy forward, becoming one of the most successful submarine aces in U.S. history. He chronicled Morton's methods and the audacity of Wahoo's patrols, ensuring that the story lived on even after the crew was gone. To this day, Japanese records still struggle to explain how an entire convoy could vanish so quickly and decisively. Morton's actions demonstrated that audacity, tactical brilliance, and personal courage could overturn assumptions and reshape the battlefield. This story matters today because it highlights the human element in war. Individual initiative, leadership, and courage can determine outcomes far beyond what doctrine predicts. The sacrifices of Morton and the 80 men of USS Wahoo illustrate how history is often written by those who dare to defy convention. If this story moved you, please hit the like button. Every click tells the algorithm that this piece of history is worth remembering. We are dedicated to rescuing forgotten stories from the archives. If you want to join us, subscribe and turn on notifications. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment with your city or state and share if someone in your family served.
Thank you for ensuring that Dudley, Mush, Morton, and the 80 men of USS Wahoo do not disappear into silence. They deserve to be remembered.